Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I am your host, Ramita Iyer, Research Analyst at the Institute. Through the month of January, we are running a special South Asia Outlook series which focuses on the developments in each South Asian country. Today, we will be discussing Sri Lanka and where it stands at the beginning of 2022 with Dr. Chulanee Attanayake, Research Fellow at ISAS. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Attanayake.
Thank you, Ramita, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, the year 2021 has been quite eventful for Sri Lanka. What are some of the key challenges or changes on the domestic front that you anticipate this year?
Yes, you're right. The year 2021 continued to pose many challenges for Sri Lanka. Most of these challenges were continuing from the previous year, such as a slowing economy, a rise in external debt burden, a rise in poverty, and cost of living. A severe wave of the pandemic that began in April in 2021 stretched the public health system's capacity, and there was a delay in comprehensive island-wide vaccination program, and some policies which were required to mitigate community transition during the festive season was misaligned. So these conditions posed stress on widespread COVID-19 wave. I think it was the second wave, major wave for the country. So, as a result of this, the number of cases grew rapidly, and the government initiated numerous lockdowns and travel restrictions to contain the spread of the virus from time to time. That affected the people's livelihood and overall economic activities were disrupted from time to time throughout the year. So the situation further affected the already ailing economy because Sri Lanka has been having some economic problem for a couple of years now, and this further affected and slowed down economic growth than which was anticipated at the beginning of the year. On top of that, there was foreign exchange crisis, which was accelerated by the disruption into tourism and a decrease in foreign remittance, both of which are primary sources of foreign currency for the country. There was also food and fuel shortages, and towards I think latter part of the year there was some explosions in domestic gas cylinders, which has become a huge issue. Now this is a leak. It is a leak that this is due to some changes in the quality and the composition of these gas cylinders. So, what Sri Lanka saw throughout 2021 is a public that is getting frustrated and dissatisfied, and very chaotic situation in the domestic sphere. So there were multiple protests against the rising cost of living and livelihood issues. Even the government workers, such as teachers and health workers, held island-wide protests and strikes demanding better pay and better resources. Um, Now, as we step into 2022, I cannot really say that this year is going to be very different from what it was in 2021. I don't see it as a smooth sailing. The Sri Lankan government is yet to inform the public and provide some assurance on some substantial public policy changes to address these long standing issues. Most of these economic issues are long standing due to various um, policy failure in the implementations, etc. Um, so on January 4th, as soon as the new year began, the government announced a US $1 billion relief package. This is perhaps to temper the growing public anger over the surging price of essential food and medical items. But the package also expect to raise civil servant salaries and pensions, remove some taxes on food and medicine, and provide cash for the people who are under the poverty line. But these measures don't look like concrete solutions. What Sri Lanka needs is dollars to purchase its essentials like essential staples such as wheat, sugar, milk powder, etc. Sri Lankans are heavily dependent on these items, and they are always coming from abroad. And on top of that, in about 2 weeks, Sri Lanka has to pay US dollar 500 million international sovereign bond payment. So, without making appropriate policies to address macroeconomic stress on the government's budgetary operations, negative balance of payments, losses incurred by large state owned enterprises, Sri Lanka will continue to face the same issues and challenges over and over again for years and decades to come. So, what we really need at the moment are some radical changes to address these issues.
Focusing on the COVID 19 pandemic, the World Bank estimates that around 500,000 people have fallen below the poverty line since the beginning of the pandemic. How do you think the government has handled it, and what more does it need to do in this respect?
Okay, so managing the economy amid a pandemic induced economic shock has been the biggest challenge for Sri Lanka for the past 2 years. And Sri Lanka's economy is import oriented and vulnerable to global capitalist boom and bust cycles that happen from time to time. And years of populist electoral policies and failed government policies have led to a growing economic crisis, which only accelerated because of the pandemic. So when the pandemic happened, the and paralyzed the global economic activity, Sri Lanka experienced its worst economic downturn. According to economists, this is the worst economic downturn in last 4 decades. And as a result of this, we see a rise in poverty in the country, particularly among the informal sector and urban workers. Many of these people are self employed or individuals in tourism and related industries, which are severely affected from the pandemic. And these people have lost their jobs. And other sectors, such as tea and garment production, also saw a decline. A large number of migrant workers from the Middle East returned home after losing their jobs. In most of these households, they were the primary breadwinners. So, there was a slight boom in agriculture in the first quarter in the 2021, but it was short lived because, again, on misplaced government policies. Um, Sri Lankan government initiated a overnight ban on chemical fertilizer despite a lot of criticisms and concerns from the experts. And this not only reduced the um, economic income, it also affected food shortage, and as a result, this also has contributed to increased poverty. Um, in 2021, when the pandemic immediately happened, government provided some relief schemes and assisted individuals who lost their jobs through various means by providing debt moratoriums, relief for loans, etc., etc. But these could not be continued in 2021, and I don't think this can be continued in this year as well, because Sri Lankan economy is already at a very bad stage, and I don't think government can um, mitigate the situation by providing relief schemes one after the other to keep the people afloat. So I think even this most recent relief package will only provide very little impact, and it will be short lived. So the what these people need and what government should be doing in order to mitigate the current economic crisis as well as the poverty levels is to provide um, and provide economic opportunities for the people, generate employments, generate businesses, generate economic activities, so that these people will have stable income. They will have economic stability.
The Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration, since it came to power, has emphasized a neutral foreign policy. How has this played out over the past year? How well do you think Sri Lanka is placed to balance between major powers in the region like India and China? And what challenges does the country face?
Well, I think Sri Lanka's foreign policy has always claimed, every government who come into power from time to time always claim that they're going to follow a neutral foreign policy or an unaligned foreign policy. They use various terms, but basically the idea has always been the same. What we see in the past few years is how difficult and challenging it is for Sri Lanka to maintain this neutral foreign policy. So what we saw in 2021 was Sri Lanka resetting relations with India um, with earnest efforts, but there were difficulties arose due to differing approaches from the two countries. For instance, um, India continues to insist on full implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution, where the Sri Lankan government has a different stance on it. So, because of these differences, always India Sri Lanka relationship have faced challenges, and we saw that happening last year as well. And following this, there was also Colombo breaking off the agreement with India and Japan to develop Easter Container Terminal due to mounting domestic protest. This didn't go well with India, and um, however, from the towards the latter part of the year, we see some improvement and strengthening of bilateral relations with the west terminal of the Colombo port offered to Adani Group, and with Sri Lanka turning towards India to get urgently needed organizing organic fertilizers, revisiting the trilateral military engagement at the Colombo Security Conclave. All these proves improvement, considerable improvement in the relationship. And on 4th of January 2022, Sri Lankan cabinet approved a new deal to jointly develop the Trincomalee oil tank farm. This was a project that had been dragging for over 30 years, if I'm not wrong. So what we see is that in terms of Sri Lanka and India, despite disruptions and challenges, it has managed to overcome those challenges from time to time, and somehow it managed to strengthen the relationship. And ties with China also have gone through some ups and downs last year, which is surprising for SLPP under SLPP government. So China continued to provide financial assistance, vaccines, medical supplies, etc., etc. And then during China Harbor Engineering, I think towards the in September or so, China Harbor Engineering Company obtained the contract to develop Colombo Port's Easter Container Terminal in stages. Then in May, Chinese Defense Minister visited Sri Lanka, which signaled some growth in defense and military ties. But towards somewhere in October, November, with the fertilizer chaos with the Chinese company, we saw a major diplomatic dispute between Sri Lanka and China. Sri Lanka rejected the organic fertilizer consignment from the Chinese company, and the Sri Lankan bank refused to make the payment. In turn, the Chinese embassy blacklisted the bank, which raised a lot of concerns. And at the end of the day, the company went for international tribunal, and the Chinese Sri Lankan government had to agree to pay US 6.4 million um, as compensation. Now, this is a huge um, issue when you look at Sri Lanka China relationship. It's not something that we have seen before. I think that also shows challenges for countries, small countries like Sri Lanka, when it comes to dealing with powerful countries like China. Um, Now, there is, Sri Lanka always at this stage still want to have warm relationship with China because of its economic partnership, developmental partnerships, etc. So, in between 7th and 9th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is expected to make a visit to Sri Lanka. So, we will see some progress and also continuing development in the bilateral relationship. However, for me, I think what is also important in the last year is how Sri Lanka became active in multilateral corporations like Indian Ocean IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association, and also how Sri Lanka strengthened bilateral relations with countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan. This is a very important factor, and I would like to see more of such partnerships rather than us trying to only balance between major powers in the region, but also trying and strengthening our cooperation with other countries so that Sri Lanka does not get overly influenced by major powers politics. Because of a strategic location, we tend to get dragged into great power politics, and this intensifying power struggle will only bring more and more challenges to Sri Lanka, and it will always be challenging in the future to make the balance between not just India and China, but even United States and other countries. Uh, Given Sri Lanka's vulnerable economic situation, major players also get more opportunity to maneuver um, Sri Lanka. Therefore, it's always a good option for Sri Lanka to build relationships outside the major powers.
Finally, turning to Sri Lanka's economic situation in more detail, it continues to face increasing inflation, a 3.3% GDP growth rate, foreign currency crisis, and high foreign debt. What are your views on the state of the economy and what can be done by the government to improve this?
Well, you're completely right. Sri Lanka's economy is in a very troubling state at the moment. There are many reasons that has led to this situation. It's not a result of 1 or 2 years. It's a result of a couple of decades. I would say since 1948, since the independence. Sri Lanka continues to see a rising debt levels and currency depreciation. Fiscal and current account deficit continues to persist, and I think in as of November 2021, its foreign reserve dropped to US dollar 106 billion. And according to experts, this can only sustain about 1 month of imports for Sri Lanka. And as I said, Sri Lanka is very much dependent on imports. Sri Lanka's economy is dependent on imports. Our international credit rating has faced difficulties, and international rating agencies are raising concerns about Sri Lanka's debt servicing capabilities. So all this has created situation where Sri Lanka should look at new and innovative measures to bring its economy back on track. So, even though experts have called for the government to seek IMF to help with the economic crisis, the government, for whatever the reasons, continue to turn in towards countries like India, China, Bangladesh in the neighborhood rather than going for a IMF package. So I'm not an economist, so I do not know the exact reasons or to comment, give a economic perspective into this. But what I can see is that this situation definitely calls for a very clear policy to address deficit and debt sustainability issues in the country. The government should make innovative moves to improve Sri Lanka's credit rating and also attract investments. But I don't think it is going to be very easy, because if your credit ratings are not in the right place, and if you are sort of downgraded by the international credit agencies and your economy is at a very fragile state, you cannot convince the investors to come and invest in the country. So it's going to be a very challenging situation. But on the plus side, Sri Lanka has a attractive strategic location. Sri Lanka has strong human resource base. We are situated in an advantageous time zone where we can provide service to any part of the world, and there are very attractive living conditions in the country. Our weather conditions are very mild and attractive to anyone who wants to come and work. So we can market this as impetus to attract investors to come and invest in the country. So what government should make is radical changes to its fiscal policies to address balance of payment and foreign reserve issues, and show that they are serious in these policy changes in order for the Sri Lankan economy to be back on track.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us today, Dr. Attanayake.
Thank you.
You were listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about the work we do, visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram.